Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Mitochondrial dysfunction and chronic inflammation can be linked to every chronic disease, which is why it's so incredibly important to understand what you can be doing to support your cellular health through the aging process. I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and I am very excited to talk to you today about a really common nutrient that oftentimes gets overlooked. And for some people, maybe you've heard of this before, maybe you haven't, maybe this is an introduction to really what happens at that cellular level through the aging process and what we can be doing to make sure that we are maintaining the health of our cells. And most of us know someone who has some type of a chronic disease. So someone who's affected by diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol. You can throw arthritis into that mix. We can look at things like macular degeneration, for example. We can look at cognitive dysfunction, including memory loss and dementia. So these are all types of chronic disease states. And in a very simplistic approach, if we look at our cell as being either deficient in something or toxic in something, then we can have a better way to target what our cells are actually needing. So if we have a toxicity coming from free radical assault on the cell, then we can start ridding the body of all of those bad free radicals and start to replenish the good. So sounds pretty easy, right? Well, let's look at a few different examples. We can start by looking at the amino acid L-carnitine. Now, this particular amino acid is incredibly important in the sense of what it's actually doing. It acts like a taxi driver. I always use this description, but it's a good way to think about this. It acts like a taxi driver by picking up the fatty acids that are on the outside of your cell, and it helps to give them a ride to the inside of the cell. And what's in the inside of the cell that's so important is your mitochondria. So it is at that point, once they're driven into the inside of the cell and make their way to the mitochondria, that they can be converted into an energy source. Now, the really interesting part about all of this, and it's actually very cool, is if we add an acetyl group to this. So if we take the amino acid L-carnitine, we add an acetyl group, now we have facilitated a means by which that amino acid L-carnitine can easily cross the blood-brain barrier, which is why Alcar, or acetyl L-carnitine, has been studied so extensively for its support of the neurons and for its free radical fighting properties. So what in the world is Alcar? Because oftentimes you'll just hear it shortened to Alcar. So Alcar is acetyl L-carnitine. It is an endogenous mitochondrial membrane compound. So endogenous means it's naturally occurring, and this helps to maintain the mitochondrial bioenergetics, which is really, really important. And we also know that acetyl L-carnitine helps to lower the increased oxidative stress that is associated with aging. So if we do a cross-sectional look at acetyl L-carnitine, we can find thousands upon thousands of published studies of Alcar. And it is one of those things that oftentimes leaves me kind of scratching my head and saying, what in the world is it with traditional doctors that they act as though they've never heard of acetyl L-carnitine and how beneficial it can be for such a wide variety of health concerns? When we look at this endogenous mitochondrial membrane compound, meaning it is naturally occurring, we know that this is what facilitates the amino acid L-carnitine across that blood-brain barrier. So we know that it exerts all of these protective effects against neurotoxicity as well as oxidative stress. It plays an essential role even in thermogenesis. So we talk about fat burning, natural fat burning. We talk about memory support and glycation reactions that can occur. We know glycation is when we have excess glucose that attaches to things and makes those things not function properly. So glycation is never a good thing that is occurring in the human body. But we know that acetyl L-carnitine targets that type of glycation reaction. And there's so much when it comes to scientific and scientifically validated research on acetyl L-carnitine. We can look at studies. There was a study that they did at Stanford University School of Medicine and was looking at the longitudinal effects of acetyl L-carnitine on patients who had the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And so they did a double-blind placebo-controlled trial where they found that Alcar was actually slowing the progression of Alzheimer's disease. You may ask yourself, well, how is it doing this? Because we know it is having these protective effects against these neurotoxicities, things such as beta amyloid plaque buildup. So there's so much research out there. We can look at the University of Pittsburgh, and back in 1995, they did a really small study, but a really important study showing all of those beneficial effects on the clinical presentation of Alzheimer's disease and looking at different neurochemical markers. So it was from there that the researchers at Stanford University took off with their further research. And they said, hey, University of Pittsburgh, they just did this really interesting study, and it showed that acetyl L-carnitine seemed to have these really protective effects in the human brain. So let's conduct an actual double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So within those two groups, one was given Alcar, the other group was given placebo. And they showed that the progression of Alzheimer's disease was slowed in the group who had been given Alcar. So acetyl L-carnitine, we know these things. We know that this acetylated form of this very powerful energy-producing amino acid plays such an essential role, even in cardiovascular health, in kidney health. So we talk about renal health. All of this is so important as we get older. So if we are lacking carnitine in terms of dietary intake, if our endogenous amount of acetyl L-carnitine is not where it should be, then we are leaving ourselves more prone to nerve damage, to cognitive decline, as well as all of the other things that we know that this very important amino acid is doing in the body when it comes to fat burning, for example. Many times people will find that once they start to utilize acetyl L-carnitine or even L-carnitine, say you take the acetyl group out and you're just using straight L-carnitine, that they find that maintaining healthy weight is much easier. Well, it makes sense because think about it. Once again, we're using that carnitine like a taxi driver. We're picking up those essential fatty acids that are lingering on the outside of the cell, and we're driving them into the mitochondria to be made into energy. So the more cellular energy we have, the better off we are. We also have been able to recognize how beneficial acetyl L-carnitine can be in the setting of metabolic disorders, even things such as type 2 diabetes. In the Journal of Metabolism, they were looking at how acetyl L-carnitine could really help type 2 diabetic patients. And what they found was the slowing of that glucose uptake, as well as the impact when we're talking about glycation, as well as oxidative stress. So there are certainly numerous studies out there. By some standards, you can look and say, okay, if we're looking at human clinical trials, we can say easily 3,000 human clinical trials that have utilized acetyl L-carnitine. If you just go into the National Institute of Health, look through the Library of Medicine, and you see how many thousands of studies, there's probably over 10,000 studies done with acetyl L-carnitine. So it's a very, very powerful amino acid. But what makes it even more powerful is when we add that acetylated group to it. Now, I want to tell you about another study, because this is key when I said mitochondrial dysfunction. If the cell doesn't have the ability to generate energy, we know that that is going to shorten the lifespan of that cell. So if we have mitochondrial decay occur, so the mitochondria is just not working the way it should be. It's kind of like if you have in your car and the battery is starting to go. And so at times you go and the car turns right over, not an issue. And other times you find you may have to jump start the car. Well, we can look at our cells in that same way. So if we don't have adequate energy being produced within that mitochondria, over time, the cell itself is not going to be functioning the way we need it to. So in the journal of the annuals of the New York Academy of Sciences back in 2004, they were looking at delaying the mitochondrial decay of aging. So we know that this is one of the things that accelerates our aging process if the cell itself can't make energy. And they were looking specifically at utilizing acetyl L-carnitine. And this was done through the Nutritional Genomics Center out in Oakland, California. And what they did is they did an analysis. So they did this meta-analysis of 21 double-blind clinical trials utilizing acetyl L-carnitine in the treatment of mild cognitive impairment and mild Alzheimer's disease. And they were looking at just how effective. So they were looking at the actual efficacy within these trials. And they found a really powerful correlation between the utilization of acetyl L-carnitine, and it came down once again to that mitochondrial energy producing ability, the return of that. And I think that that is certainly quite relevant. And when we talk about amino acids and you think to yourself, well, why don't I hear more about the importance of amino acids? Oh, I wish I had an answer for you. I wish I knew why, if you were to talk to most traditional doctors, they would say, I have really no idea what acetyl L-carnitine is, which is alarming because I said that's an endogenous amino acid and it's utilized throughout the entire body. So heart health, kidney health, brain health, it's facilitated inside of that cell in order for that cell to function properly. Now you can partner this up with other amino acids such as alpha-lipoic acid. So if you go to our website and you find the Alcar with ALA formulation, this is the acetylated form of that amino acid L-carnitine along with alpha-lipoic acid. Now, alpha-lipoic acid is really quite interesting. This is, once again, an endogenous antioxidant, meaning it's naturally occurring in the human body. But it's really unique in the sense that it has this ability to regenerate our other essential endogenous antioxidants, things like vitamin C and vitamin E, coenzyme Q10, glutathione, as well as superoxide dismutase. So if we have adequate alpha-lipoic acid in the body, it helps to protect those other very important antioxidants. The other interesting thing about alpha-lipoic acid is that it plays this essential role in terms of being a cofactor for different enzymes, these key enzymes when it comes to generating energy. So we look at Alcar and then add alpha-lipoic acid to that. We are talking about an energy producing powerhouse. So there is so much information out there when it comes to both of these nutrients, and the fact that we can take these in terms of supplementation form is what's really quite unique about it. We also know alpha-lipoic acid has been studied quite extensively when it comes to nervous system health. So once again, for people who have nerve-induced damage brought on because of excessive glycation, perhaps because of diabetes, they have found that alpha-lipoic acid can really help those neurons. So those damaged neurons, when we start to utilize alpha-lipoic acid, we have found that to be very, very beneficial. They've even studied it in the setting of kidney health. So at the Department of Pathology, the University of Pittsburgh, they were able to show how alpha lipoic acid could actually attenuate hyperglycemia and prevent glomerular mesangial matrix expansion. So what exactly does that mean? That's a lot of big words. It means in a diabetic, when you have excess glucose, so high levels of glucose, meaning what do we have? A lot of glycation that's occurring, which can then damage the actual cells within the kidney, which is why there's a whole division that's, dealing with diabetic nephropathies. So if we are dealing with kidney damage brought on because of uncontrolled blood glucose, and we know alpha lipoic acid can play a role into protecting the kidney from that, then that makes it a very important antioxidant. So it's not only the fact that it can fend off the oxidative stress that occurs within the kidney, but we also recognize that it plays this role in terms of blood sugar regulation. So I know everyone is looking for kind of that fountain of youth. And I often explain to people that if you look at things very simplistic, we either have too much of something, which means we need to remove it, or we don't have enough of something, we're deficient in something, then we need to replenish that. So if we know that there are things that we can be doing to replenish what is lost due to aging or illness, such as chronic disease states, then why wouldn't we? And we can look at that combination of acetyl L-carnitine along with alpha lipoic acid and say, wow, we can do so much at that cellular level. Now, another interesting component that has come out in all of this research when it comes to acetyl L-carnitine is how it can be beneficial within neurotransmitters. And Rockefeller University was looking at the impact of acetyl L-carnitine in depression. So they were looking at patients who had suffered from major depressive disorders and found that they often had a comorbid condition. And that comorbid condition was low levels of acetyl L-carnitine. So really quite interesting because naturally produced in the body is acetyl L-carnitine. And if we're having low levels of this, they've been able to correlate this to worsening of depressive symptoms. And they also were able to show in their studies that acetyl L-carnitine supplementation could actually alleviate many of the depressive symptoms. So once again, what are we doing? We're driving. We're acting like that taxi driver. We're driving that acetyl L-carnitine into that cell so the cell can function. So we talk about neurotransmitters and why neurotransmitters matter. We talk about blood glucose regulation, why that matters. We talk about neurotoxicity and oxidative stress. All of these things matter. And if we want to be able to age gracefully, and we know that we have two endogenous things. One is an amino acid, the other one is an antioxidant. If we partner those two up, we are really lending a major helping hand to our cells. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. So go to our website, invitehealth.com. Check out the Alcar with ALA. So many different ways that you can utilize this formulation in terms of optimizing your overall health and wellness. Now, I just want to thank you for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Make sure that you subscribe. You can leave us a review, as well as following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.